earliest leaders in the middle school movement were determined to right the wrongs in the way that young adolescents were being educated. They wanted to address the shortcomings in the junior high school that had become too much like the senior high school. They had many clear ideas about how middle school education should look, and they possessed honorable motives for initiating change on behalf of young adolescents. In those early days, however, their individual ideas were as varied as their backgrounds. Many of the leaders were spread out geographically. In their fervor for the cause, they devoted their energy to making middle schools look and operate differently from their junior high school predecessors. It was some years before they began collectively examining and articulating their ideology about middle school education. In retrospect, some of the early leaders consider this a great weakness of the movement. With their common goal of improving education for young adolescents through action and advocacy, and with their shared passionate ideas directed towards positive change, the early participants met the prerequisite conditions for initiating a social and educational movement.
However, Bean some years later lamented,
and it's failed to take on any kind of social sense of itself, like, for example, democratic education. And I think failing to stand for something in a larger societal sense has been an obstacle in the movement.
Instead, Bean believes that the movement tried to elevate puberty to the level of an ideology, rather than to articulate clearly an ideology grounded in philosophy that is concerned with meeting the various changing needs of young adolescents. Bean's preference has always been democratic education. Similarly, John Arnold stated,
"We've never had a clear enough vision of what we want for kids. I believe we need to embody the progressive education understanding that the aim of education is the development of good people. It's who people are that counts, their character, attitudes, values, integrity."
Some of our participants believe that the early leaders did have a clear ideology, one grounded in progressive education. Among them, Arnold, Bean, Dickinson, Doda, George, and Lounsbury, who described the middle school movement as progressive education in contemporary dress. Perhaps it was not a lack of ideology that impaired the movement, but a failure to communicate that ideology clearly, widely, loudly, or consistently enough. Conceivably, those in the schools who heard and were supportive were necessarily so occupied with the organizational work and clarifying the purposes of the movement that limited time and opportunity were left to advocate for the philosophy. Nancy Doda reflected as follows.
One of the things that I'm struck by as I look back on those early conversations in middle school is that we were so caught up in this passion to try to bring feeling and heart to the middle school, to the school, to the institution, to the lives of children. So desperate to create schools in which whole human beings could be celebrated and valued, and that children would be honored as human beings as well as students. And all of that remains, I think, very critical in education. But because we were so passionate about that part of the story, we didn't articulate as clearly as we should have the connection between that and cognitive and academic achievement and learning.
Doda's comments corroborate the idea that passion and dedication among the leaders were almost tangible, but that they did not communicate their message clearly enough to those outside middle school education. Therefore, the public was left to draw its own conclusions about middle school education. Doda believes that they therefore interpreted that middle schools were really just soft, warm, fuzzy places that weren't about deep intellectual learning. Joan Lipsitz expressed some of the same concerns about failure to communicate widely enough.
Sometimes when you start something, you need for it to be protected and small and in a hothouse. But after that, if you really want to have impact, you have to say not who are the true believers, but who needs to be the true believer, and how can we make that happen? Otherwise, you don't have enough impact. And in the end, I think there could have been greater impact had there been a more strategic set of alliances that were forged into the world of research, into the world of public policy setting, into the major political forces in urban education. It stayed boutique too long.
Communicating the vision and ideology of the middle school movement to those outside of it is not the only issue, however. In addition, there has always been some level of disagreement about the collective middle school identity within members of the movement. This disagreement has not necessarily been a liability, however. Many of our participants suggested that a strength of the middle school movement has been that it has been open to debate. These debates among leaders have often resulted in important collective milestones. For example, in 1981, John Swaim was elected president of the NMSA. He had been involved in the NMSA since the mid-1970s, and he realized that the organization had a problem. For several years they had been meeting, and people across the country had been committing their professional lives to middle school education. However, the organization had no official position or set of principles to support and promote middle school education. Swaim appointed a committee to develop a position statement with a clear definition of the middle school. The committee was comprised of William Alexander, Al Arth, the chair, Charles Cherry, Virginia school principal, Donald Eichhorn, John Lounsbury, editor, Conrad Tepfer, and Gordon Vars. John Swaim recalled thinking that it might take about 6 months for the group to write the document. In the end, it took about 2.5 years.
And I can almost guarantee you every word was fought over in that document. We just about lost a couple members off of that committee that resigned from the committee. And I still have the letters from them saying that we were defining middle school too much, that it was more of a philosophy, and we were trying to make a checklist out of it. And God bless John Lounsbury, he worked with me and those people that they stayed with it, so forth, and we did some revisions and so forth. But in actuality, the first This We Believe, there was 10 components, and it got turned into a checklist in many respects and so forth, but it was a start, you know. So yeah, I think there are some, there's room in middle school for a lot of philosophical interpretation of what middle school should be all about. And you take our founders, even in those early years, you know, there were some, well, we shouldn't be saying that everyone should have to have teaming, or should teaming be in there, or how do we define this, or are we defining it too much, or should this be more free-flowing? And I think some of those debates, you know, still go on in maybe a little different arena.
In 1982, the Middle School Association published This We Believe, its landmark position statement about the organization's vision for schools for young adolescents. Many of our participants cite the publication of this document as one of the most significant events in the history of the middle school movement because, as Cheryl Bergman notes, it gave schools a set of standards and a philosophy to implement. Subsequent editions of This We Believe were published in 1995, 2003, and 2010, as participants in middle school education have continued to learn and grow and debate ideas. Paul George spoke to the power of evolving ideas.
You know, the middle school concept is a cauldron of ideas, and that's one of the things that's kept me interested all these years, is that we keep unfolding what the middle school means.
These debates and struggles to come to agreement have often pushed the movement forward, but have led to what some see as the movement having two distinct wings. Being explained.
but think about the middle school movement as having two wings, one much larger than the other. The largest one is what I would call the mainstream middle school movement. And that is people who are certainly caring about young adolescents. They speak well of young adolescents. They enjoy young adolescents. But they are mostly interested in structural changes in the middle schools, and in a sense, as we used to say with the curriculum work, what they're interested in is trying to, and I don't mean this to be critical, but what they're interested in is really engaging activities, in a sense trying to find what bait to put on the hook to pull the kids in. So there is that kind of mainstream group, and it's the largest group, and they've been incredibly important, and they're extremely well-intentioned, and I have great respect for them, and I don't mean to be critical. And then there's the other wing to which I would belong, which is the progressive wing of the middle schools movement, which not only is trying to be responsive to young adolescents, but also believes that the movement should be addressing larger social issues and obligations. You know, in 1968, in a conversation with Connie Tepfer, he said to me, you know, he said, the thing about most educators, child-centered educators, is they don't understand that if you really love children, you have to hate the things that crush their souls. You have to hate racism, and you have to hate sexism, and you have to hate poverty. And I never forgot that. And I think probably if I were to explain my work in the middle school movement, it wouldn't be about trying to find a way to integrate subject areas. It would be about a search for a democratic curriculum and a curriculum with a social conscience.
The middle school ideology, then, has been characterized somewhat differently for those who have spent much of their professional lives inside it. At its core is the intent to provide the best possible education for young adolescents. Individuals who have been involved and have established their own positions about how that education might look and even why it is important. Among our participants, the attraction to educating young adolescents has often had a spiritual dimension. Doda and Erb called it a moral imperative, and George Johnston and Lounsbury characterized it as a mission. Cheryl Bergman explained.
It was such a commitment, such a deep, unselfish involvement in the whole bettering the lives of children at that age group that you just couldn't help but be brought into it.
Perhaps the middle school movement is still in search of its ideology and identity, and perhaps the efforts to continue the search, to keep moving forward toward the quest for an appropriate education for young adolescents, has been what has kept so many involved in the journey.